The generational conflict between the Ptolemaic kings of the south and the Seleucid kings of the north was a relentless struggle for the remnants of Alexander's empire. This rivalry, defined by constant warfare, reached its most dramatic and self-destructive climax in the disastrous marriage alliance of 252 BC. What was intended to bring peace instead resulted in a gruesome series of murders that perfectly fulfilled the prophetic forecast of its failure. This cycle of violence ultimately weakened both kingdoms, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable. Even a decisive victory, like the one won by Ptolemy IV at Raphia, ironically planted the seeds of internal rebellion and decay, proving that neither side could achieve lasting dominance. Into this power vacuum, a new force began to emerge from the West. While the successor kingdoms were locked in their bitter feud, the Roman Republic was methodically expanding its influence. Rome's arrival on the world stage was not as a mere observer, but as a decisive player that would ultimately eclipse both the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The prophecy accurately foretold this dramatic shift, describing a power that would come against the victorious northern king and do according to his own will, a power before whom none shall stand. The era of the North-South rivalry was over, and the age of a new, far greater power had begun. It is this very power and its fateful entanglement with the glorious land that the prophecy turns to next. Our journey will continue with the bloody birth of the Roman Empire under the Caesars, a period of unparalleled ambition and conquest that saw the last vestiges of Greek power absorbed into a new, formidable entity. We will then witness the empire's profound transformation as the pagan eagle gives way to the Christian cross, creating a new kind of superpower where church and state were fused. Finally, we will arrive at the violent, revolutionary climax that sought to erase God from history itself. Through it all, we will explore the striking and intricate parallels between the prophetic text and the historical record, revealing a story of power, faith, and rebellion on an epic scale. The prophecy's focus now shifts from the warring Greek kingdoms of the north and south to a new, ascendant power. This power would not merely defeat its rivals, it would consume them, forging a new world order. This is the story of Rome, from its violent transition out of a republic into a global empire. A story that begins with a man of almost superhuman ambition. The prophecy announces the arrival of a new conqueror. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom. History presents a figure who perfectly embodies this description: Gaius Julius Caesar. A man of grand designs and boundless ambition, Caesar was a military and political genius. His path to absolute power was carved through the chaos of the Roman Civil War, a brutal conflict against his rival, the great general Pompey. After decisively defeating Pompey's forces at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, Caesar pursued his foe across the Mediterranean, a pursuit that would lead him to the ancient and wealthy land of Egypt, the last great Hellenistic kingdom yet to be brought under Roman sway. In late 48 BC, Caesar arrived in the magnificent city of Alexandria. He was met not by Pompey, but by the advisors of Egypt's young king, Ptolemy XIII. Hoping to win the favor of the victorious Roman, they presented Caesar with a gruesome gift, the severed head of Pompey. The gesture backfired. Caesar, disgusted by the murder of a Roman consul and his former son-in-law, used the act as a pretext to intervene in Egypt's own simmering civil war. The kingdom was torn between the 10-year-old Ptolemy XIII and his exiled older sister, the 21-year-old Cleopatra VII. It was here that one of history's most legendary encounters took place. Aware that she could not approach Caesar through official channels controlled by her brother's ministers, Cleopatra devised a daring plan. According to ancient historians, she had herself wrapped in a bundle of cloths or a bed sack and was smuggled into the palace by a loyal servant. Unfurled at the feet of the 52-year-old Roman general, the young queen made an impression that would alter the course of history. This alliance, born of political necessity and personal charisma, is captured in the prophecy, "He shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her." Caesar's affair with Cleopatra was a masterful political move for both, but it entangled him in a conflict he had not anticipated: the bitter and costly Alexandrian War. Caesar's decision to back Cleopatra enraged Ptolemy's supporters, who laid siege to the royal palace. With only a small force of around 4,000 men, Caesar was trapped in a hostile city, vastly outnumbered by an Egyptian army of 20,000. His situation was perilous. At one point, his boat capsized in the harbor, and he was forced to swim for his life. It was in this desperate moment that another line of the prophecy found its fulfillment: "And upright ones with him, thus shall he do." Caesar's victory was not won by his legions alone. He sent for reinforcements from every neighboring province, but the critical aid came from an unexpected quarter. Antipater the Idumean, a man of great influence among the Jews, marched to Caesar's aid with 3,000 Jewish soldiers. More importantly, he persuaded the Jewish communities in Egypt to open key passes and provide supplies for the Roman relief force. Without the help of these upright ones, Caesar's Egyptian campaign and perhaps his life would have been lost. With their help, he defeated Ptolemy's army at the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. The young king drowned while trying to flee. The prophecy concerning Cleopatra, however, contained a subtle but crucial caveat. "But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him." Though she became Caesar's ally and bore him a son, Caesarion, her ultimate loyalty was to her own power and the preservation of Egypt. After Caesar's assassination, she famously allied herself with his rival, Mark Antony, against Caesar's legally adopted son and heir, Octavian. In doing so, she stood against the house and legacy of the very man who had placed her on the throne, a precise fulfillment of the prophecy. After securing Egypt, Caesar embarked on a series of campaigns that cemented his status as the undisputed master of the Roman world, fulfilling the words, "After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many." He marched into Asia Minor to deal with Pharnaces II of Pontus, a war he won with such astonishing speed that he reported it to the Senate with the immortal phrase, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered. He then proceeded to Africa and Spain, crushing the last remnants of Pompey's faction at the battles of Thapsus and Munda. Finally, he returned to Rome, the fort of his own land, where a cowed Senate showered him with honors, eventually naming him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. But at the very pinnacle of his power, the prophecy declared his sudden end. But he shall stumble and fall, and not be found. The language implies an unexpected, almost accidental demise. On the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, as he sat in the Senate chamber, a group of conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius rushed upon him. The man who had won hundreds of battles fell, not on a battlefield, but to the daggers of his own colleagues, pierced by 23 wounds. In an instant, the most powerful man in the world was gone, and his body lay lifeless at the foot of a statue of his great rival, Pompey. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome back into civil war. Out of the chaos, a second triumvirate was formed by Caesar's chosen heir, his great-nephew Octavian. His most trusted general, Mark Antony, and the statesman Marcus Lepidus. Their stated goal was to hunt down Caesar's assassins, a task they accomplished at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. But their alliance was one of convenience, a prelude to another power struggle. Through years of masterful political maneuvering, the young and unassuming Octavian outplayed his rivals, eventually emerging as the sole ruler of the Roman world. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, and the Roman Empire was born. His reign fulfilled the next line of the prophecy. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. The glory of the kingdom was the Pax Romana, the famed Roman peace, an unprecedented 2-century era of stability and prosperity that Augustus inaugurated. He embarked on a massive public works program, boasting that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Art, literature, and architecture flourished. This was the Augustan Age, the undisputed golden age of Rome. The prophecy, however, identifies this glorious ruler not by his military victories or his building projects, but by a specific and seemingly mundane policy. He was a raiser of taxes. This points to the very foundation of his enduring power. While Caesar's conquests laid the groundwork, it was Augustus's sweeping bureaucratic and financial reforms that cemented Roman authority for centuries. He established a permanent civil service, developed networks of roads with an official courier system, and, most importantly, completely overhauled the empire's system of taxation. He introduced customs duties and a general excise tax of 1% on all goods sold in markets, a system that affected every person in the vast empire. The true strength of the Iron Kingdom lay not just in its legions, but in its unparalleled ability to systematically organize, count, and tax its subjects. This imperial policy had a consequence that reverberated far beyond the Roman treasury. The Gospel of Luke records the historical fulfillment of this prophecy. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Luke 2:1. This census, a tool of imperial administration, became an instrument of divine providence. It compelled a carpenter named Joseph and his expectant wife Mary to travel from their home in Nazareth to their ancestral town of Bethlehem. There, the Messiah was born, precisely as the ancient prophecies had foretold.
The prophecy concludes for this ruler, "But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle." Augustus reigned for over 40 years, a long and effective rule. And just as predicted, his end was not violent. In 14 AD, at the age of 76, Augustus died peacefully in his bed from natural causes, not in war or by an assassin's blade. Similarly, the decades of peace he established feel just as fleeting as his long reign, shrinking in history to seem like only a few days. This illustrates a timeless truth, that even the greatest eras of happiness and stability pass by much faster than we realize. Following the glorious reign of Augustus, the prophecy foretells a dramatic shift in the character of Rome's leadership. For centuries, from Alexander the Great and the warring Diadochi to Roman titans like Pompey, Caesar, and even Augustus himself, kingdoms were won through overt ambition and the power of the sword. The prophecy, however, predicted a new kind of ruler, "And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably, and obtain the kingdom by flatteries." History identifies this figure as Tiberius Caesar, the stepson of Augustus. Tiberius's ascension to the throne was a masterclass in political theater, perfectly matching the prophecy's description. Upon Augustus's death, Tiberius, with characteristic dissimulation, affected a deep reluctance to assume power. He lamented the burdens of the state and declared himself unequal to the task. The servile Roman Senate, in turn, repeatedly begged and flattered him, imploring him to accept the sovereignty of the empire. He eventually yielded, having obtained the kingdom not by force, but peaceably and through flatteries. Even so, he was never beloved by the people or the Senate, who never truly gave him the honor of the kingdom. Augustus himself is said to have considered his stepson too vile to wear the purple of Rome. While Tiberius had been a brilliant and successful general in his youth, his reign as emperor descended into a dark and sordid affair, justifying the prophetic label of a vile person. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius paint a grim portrait of a ruler consumed by suspicion, paranoia, and cruelty. After the suspicious death of his popular nephew Germanicus and his own son Drusus, Tiberius became a recluse. In 26 AD, he permanently withdrew from Rome to the island of Capri, leaving the administration of the empire in the hands of his ruthless Praetorian prefect, Sejanus. From Capri, reports emerged of a depraved and tyrannical ruler.
Look at this headline in the news, Capri. This is exactly what I was telling you about yesterday.
Indulging in debauchery while orchestrating treason trials that eliminated any perceived rival in Rome. His rule became, in the words of one historian, a disgusting narrative of servility on the one hand and of despotic ferocity on the other. Yet it is within the reign of this dark and morally questionable emperor that the prophecy places an event of supreme significance. The text continues, "And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant." The phrase, "arms of a flood," speaks to the overwhelming military might of the Roman legions under Tiberius, which continued to secure and expand the empire's frontiers. But the stunning climax of the verse is the breaking of the Prince of the Covenant, a clear prophetic title for the Messiah. It was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar that John the Baptist began his ministry. A few years later, in a remote province of the vast Roman Empire, Jesus Christ was brought to trial before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Pilate, an appointee of Tiberius's court, ultimately ordered the crucifixion. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing decades later, recorded the event with clinical precision. Christus, the founder of that name, was put to death as a criminal by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. Herein lies a profound historical irony. The Roman Empire, at the zenith of its power, but led by one of its most infamous emperors, became the unwitting instrument for what Christian theology considers the most pivotal event in human history. From Rome's perspective, the execution of a provincial Jewish teacher was a minor footnote, a routine police action to maintain order in a troublesome territory.
That guy claims himself to be a king of all the world! He is definitely plotting to overthrow Caesar.
Yet the prophecy elevates this seemingly insignificant event to the defining moment of Tiberius's reign. The immense machinery of the Roman state was focused on its own grand politics and frontier wars, yet its most lasting impact, as framed by this ancient text, was an act it barely registered at the time. It reveals a theme of a divine purpose moving silently and invisibly within the oblivious gears of secular history. To understand the full scope of Rome's rise, the prophecy flashes back to its foundational methods. Verse 23 states, "And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people." This accurately describes Rome's unique path to power. Long before it was an empire, the small Roman Republic made a league, or treaty of friendship, with the Jewish nation in 161 BC. This was a pattern Rome repeated across the Mediterranean. It would appear as a friend and protector, signing mutual assistance pacts, only to work deceitfully, using these alliances to extend its influence, impose its will, and eventually absorb its allies into its growing dominion. In this way, Rome became strong with a small people, growing from a city-state into a world power through shrewd diplomacy and legal maneuvering as much as through outright conquest. The prophecy then returns to the main timeline, depicting the final, decisive conflict that would unify the entire Mediterranean world under Rome's singular authority. After the death of Julius Caesar, the Second Triumvirate had divided the Roman world. Octavian controlled the west from Rome, while Mark Antony took the east. This set the stage for the final act in the long prophetic drama of the King of the North versus the King of the South. Antony, based in the east, fell under the spell of Egypt's queen Cleopatra. He became her lover and political partner, effectively merging his Roman authority with the power of the historic King of the South. Octavian, based in Italy, now represented the northern power. The prophecy notes the treachery that preceded their clash. "And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table." The triumvirate was a table of lies.
Antony had married Octavian's own sister Octavia in a political maneuver to feign friendship, but both men were aspiring for sole dominion. The inevitable collision came at the naval battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31 BC. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a massive fleet of over 500 large warships. Octavian's fleet was smaller, but crewed by more experienced sailors. The world was the prize. The battle raged for hours until a shocking turn of events. Cleopatra, perhaps frightened by the chaos of the battle, suddenly ordered her squadron of 60 ships to break through the lines and flee for Egypt. Antony, seeing her departure and lost to everything but his passion for her, abandoned his men and his chance at world power to follow her. The prophecy had foretold his doom. He shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. Antony's defeat was sealed by a cascade of betrayals. His land army, disgusted by his actions, surrendered to Octavian. His forces in Libya declared for his rival. Finally, back in Egypt, he was betrayed by Cleopatra herself, and his remaining troops deserted him. He died by his own sword. Octavian returned to Rome, fulfilling the next line, "Then shall he return into his land with great riches." He brought with him the immense treasury of Egypt, which was now formally annexed as a Roman province. The victory at Actium was more than just the end of a Roman civil war. It was the culmination of a cycle that began centuries earlier with the death of Alexander the Great. In this final battle, the eagle of Rome had fully consumed the legacy of the Greek goat, unifying the entire Hellenistic world under one undisputed master. The prophecy then looks forward beyond the reign of Augustus, and his heart shall be against the Holy Covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. This points to Rome's future relationship with the people of God. The empire's heart was turned against the Holy Covenant in the persecutions against the early Christians, most infamously under Emperor Nero, who in 64 AD falsely blamed them for the Great Fire of Rome and had them brutally executed as human torches. The ultimate exploit against the covenant people, however, came in 70 AD. After years of simmering tensions, the Jews of Judea rose in a great revolt against Roman rule in 66 AD. The Roman general Vespasian and his son Titus were dispatched to crush the rebellion. By 70 AD, they had laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. The historian Josephus, an eyewitness to the events, provides a harrowing account of the horrors that followed. The siege coincided with the Passover, and the city was swollen with millions of pilgrims, trapping them inside. Famine became so extreme that people gnawed on leather belts, and in one horrific case, a mother cooked and ate her own child, a direct fulfillment of the curses for disobedience recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. Titus ordered thousands of captured Jews to be crucified on crosses around the city walls as a terror tactic. Finally, the Roman legions breached the walls, slaughtering the inhabitants and setting fire to the magnificent Second Temple. The city and its holy house were razed to their foundations. Over 1 million people perished, and the survivors were scattered across the earth as slaves and wanderers. This devastating campaign was the ultimate Roman exploit against the Holy Covenant.
The prophetic narrative now charts a fundamental transformation. The Iron Empire of military might would begin to crumble, but from its ruins, a new and different kind of Roman power would emerge. One that wielded not just the sword, but the scepter of spiritual authority. The prophecy foretells a turning point for Rome. At the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. This was not to be a glorious campaign like the conquest of Egypt under Augustus or the destruction of Jerusalem under Titus. This venture would lead to decline and division. This return south points to a pivotal decision made by Emperor Constantine the Great. In 330 AD, he moved the capital of the Roman Empire from the city of Rome to the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, which he rebuilt and renamed Constantinople. While this created a magnificent new center of power in the east, it was a fateful blow to the old capital. Rome lost its political prestige, and the western half of the empire was left increasingly exposed and vulnerable. Into this weakening empire came a relentless tide of invaders, fulfilling the next line, "For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved." Chittim is a term used to describe powers from across the Mediterranean coasts. And here it represents the waves of barbarian tribes, Goths, Vandals, Huns, and others, that began to press upon and break through the empire's frontiers. The Western Empire was grieved by a perfect storm of crises, endless wars, political instability that saw emperors rise and fall with shocking frequency, crippling taxation, and a debased currency. The invasions culminated in devastating sacks of the city of Rome itself, most notably by the Vandals in 455 AD, who systematically stripped the city of its treasures over 2 weeks. The final, symbolic end came in 476 AD, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. As the secular empire was failing, its leaders sought a new source of unity. This is the prophecy's indignation against the Holy Covenant and the turn to have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. The emperors, beginning with Constantine, turned to the Christian Church. Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD granted legal toleration to Christianity, ending centuries of persecution. Then, in 380 AD, Emperor Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which went much further, making Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire. The state now had intelligence, or a working agreement with a church that, in this interpretation, had begun to forsake the Holy Covenant by incorporating pagan philosophies and establishing a powerful clerical hierarchy. This new church-state alliance began to systematically dismantle the old pagan world. The daily sacrifice of paganism was taken away. In its place, a new power was established. "In arms shall stand on his part." The military forces of the newly converted barbarian kingdoms, like the Franks under Clovis, now pledged their swords to the Bishop of Rome. In the political vacuum left by the fallen emperors, the papacy emerged as the new, central authority in the West. The prophecy's abomination that maketh desolate is interpreted as this new system of combined political and religious power. This system was fully established in 538 AD, the year that a decree by the Eastern Emperor Justinian, which recognized the Pope as the head of all the holy churches, could finally be enforced in Italy after his general Belisarius drove the opposing Ostrogoths from Rome. The decline of secular Rome and the rise of ecclesiastical Rome were two sides of the same coin. The failure of the old empire created the very vacuum that the new papacy was destined to fill. The rise of the papacy was not instantaneous. It was a centuries-long struggle for dominance, a silver thread of conflict that ran parallel to the great movements of nations. A pivotal moment in this ascent was the investiture controversy, a titanic clash between Pope Gregory VII and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV in the 11th century. The conflict centered on a simple question: who had the right to appoint bishops and other church officials, the Pope or the Emperor? For centuries, secular rulers had practiced lay investiture, appointing clergy who would be loyal to them. This practice was a cornerstone of royal power and an essential tool of governance in a fragmented feudal world. Following the collapse of the Roman Empire, rulers like Charlemagne and his successors built their kingdoms by integrating the church directly into their administrative structure. A bishop or an abbot was not merely a spiritual guide. He was a major feudal lord who controlled vast tracts of land, commanded significant wealth, and owed military service to the crown. From the king's perspective, allowing an external power like the Pope to appoint such a crucial figure was unthinkable. By personally investing bishops with the symbols of their office, the ring and the pastoral staff, a monarch ensured the loyalty of these powerful vassals and maintained control over his lands. This established order is precisely what made Pope Gregory VII's reforms so revolutionary. A fierce reformer, Gregory was determined to end this practice and establish the absolute supremacy of the papal office. He saw lay investiture as the root of the church's deepest corruptions, particularly the act of simony, where church offices were sold to the highest bidder.
40,000 going once, 40,000 going twice. Do I hear 50?
Gregory's audacious goal was to sever this dependency and establish the church as an independent and superior institution. The investiture controversy, therefore, fundamentally began to reverse the power dynamic. No longer would the king automatically create the bishop. Now, the papacy was asserting a power so great that it could challenge, excommunicate, and even attempt to depose the king himself, laying the groundwork for a future where popes would crown emperors and claim supreme authority over all of Christendom. In 1075, Gregory issued the Dictatus Papae, a bold declaration claiming, among other things, that the Pope had the authority to depose emperors. Henry IV, who relied on his appointed bishops to administer his empire, responded with fury. He convened a council of German bishops who declared Gregory a false monk and no longer pope. Gregory's countermove was unprecedented.
Then turn this dial to initiate the transfer. This coin covers the expense.
He excommunicated Henry, declared him deposed, and, most critically, released all of Henry's subjects from their oaths of allegiance to him. This was a political masterstroke. The German nobles, eager to diminish the emperor's power, seized the opportunity and rebelled. Facing a full-scale revolt, Henry was forced into a humiliating submission. In the dead of winter, In January 1077, he journeyed across the snowy Alps to the castle of Canossa in Italy, where the Pope was staying. For 3 days, the most powerful secular ruler in Europe stood barefoot in the snow, dressed as a penitent, begging for the Pope's forgiveness. Though the peace was temporary, the image was permanent. The walk to Canossa became a powerful symbol of the papacy's newfound authority over the crowned heads of Europe. However, this growing power also led to internal corruption and crisis. The Avignon papacy, 1309 to 1377, saw the papal court move from Rome to Avignon, France, where it fell under the heavy influence of the French monarchy. This period, derisively called the Babylonian captivity of the Church, damaged the papacy's prestige. The crisis deepened with the Western Schism, 1378 to 1417, a scandalous period where 2 and later 3 rival popes simultaneously claimed legitimacy, one in Rome and one in Avignon.
I am leaving this place immediately.
Europe was split along political lines, with nations choosing which pope to support based on their alliances. This spectacle of rival pontiffs excommunicating each other shattered the image of a unified Christendom and exposed the political machinations behind the sacred office, paving the way for future challenges to its authority. With this new religio-political power established in Rome, the prophecy shifts its focus. The primary conflict is no longer between nations and armies, but between the established church and those who would dare to dissent. The prophecy foretold that this new power would corrupt by flatteries those who do wickedly against the covenant, securing its authority by forging alliances with secular kings, granting them divine legitimacy in exchange for their loyalty and military support. But a counterforce would also arise. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. These were not to be exploits of military conquest, but remarkable acts of faith, teaching, and endurance in the face of overwhelming opposition. These were the dissenters, the so-called heretics of the Middle Ages, who understand among the people and would instruct many. Among these groups were the Waldenses, who emerged in the 12th century. Following a merchant named Peter Waldo, they advocated a simple faith based on the Gospels, apostolic poverty, and the right of lay people, including women, to preach. They painstakingly translated and distributed portions of the Bible in the common language, a direct challenge to the church's authority, which led to their fierce persecution. Another prominent group was the Albigenses, also known as the Cathars, who flourished in southern France. They criticized the wealth and perceived moral corruption of the Catholic clergy and held dualistic beliefs about good and evil. In response, Pope Innocent III launched the brutal Albigensian Crusade, 1209 to 1229, a war that devastated the region and resulted in the massacre of thousands. Later, during the Reformation, the Huguenots of France would endure a similar fate, suffering through decades of religious wars and horrific events like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572. The prophecy details the fate of these dissenters with chilling accuracy. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil, many days. For a period of many days,
interpreted as the prophetic 1260 years of papal supremacy from 538 to 1798 AD, these groups were hunted. The instrument of this persecution was the medieval Inquisition, an ecclesiastical court established to root out and punish heresy. Inquisitors used secret testimonies, denied the accused legal counsel, and employed torture to extract confessions. Those deemed unrepentant heretics were handed over to the secular authorities to be burned at the stake. The text notes that during this long period of trial, they shall be holpen with a little help. This is seen as a reference to the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, which provided a measure of relief and political protection for those who broke with Rome. However, the prophecy adds a caution, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. The Reformation was also a political event, and many princes and nobles joined the cause for personal gain and political advantage rather than pure religious conviction. Finally, the prophecy reveals the divine purpose behind this long, dark period of suffering. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. The persecution was a refining fire meant to test and purify the faith of God's people until a specific, predetermined time of the end.
The prophecy now arrives at its dramatic climax, describing a powerful king who arises at the time of the end. The language used is remarkable, as it serves as both a final, summarizing character profile of the papal power that dominated the previous era, and a startlingly literal description of the new radical force that would rise up to overthrow it. First, these verses can be read as a powerful summary of the papacy at the height of its power. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, speaks to the doctrine of papal supremacy, which claimed authority over all secular rulers and saw popes depose kings and emperors. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers is interpreted as a departure from the simple faith of the early Christian apostles in favor of a complex system of tradition and hierarchy. The phrase, "nor the desire of women," points directly to the mandatory celibacy of the clergy, a unique feature of the Roman Church. Finally, "nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all," reiterates the apex of papal claims to be the sole vicar of Christ on earth, the ultimate authority in both spiritual and temporal matters. Yet, at the very moment this papal system seemed entrenched, history produced a new power that fulfilled these same prophetic words in a terrifyingly literal way. The prophecy pivots, using this same description as a bridge to introduce the atheistic power of revolutionary France. This new king would not just exalt itself above other gods in a figurative sense, it would attempt to abolish God entirely. The French Revolution is thus framed not as a random historical event, but as the secular political culmination of the same spirit of self-exaltation that the prophecy had identified for centuries in a religious guise. It represents the same principle of human-centered authority taken to its radical and violent conclusion. The intellectual seeds of the French Revolution were sown during the Age of Enlightenment, a radical new idea that challenged the old order. Philosophers like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Denis Diderot championed human reason as the ultimate authority, directly attacking the twin pillars of the old world, the divine right of kings and the doctrines of the Catholic Church. Voltaire, a prolific writer and satirist, used his sharp wit to criticize religious intolerance and the Church's vast power, famously urging his followers to crush the infamous thing.
C'est ridicule.
Rousseau, in his influential work, The Social Contract, argued that legitimate authority comes not from God, but from the consent of the governed, the general will of the people. Diderot, as the chief editor of the monumental Encyclopedia, created a compendium of human knowledge that prioritized science and secular thought, subtly undermining religious dogma in its very structure. These ideas, once confined to the salons of Paris, spread throughout French society, eroding the legitimacy of both the monarchy and the church, and preparing the ground for a radical upheaval.
These ideas culminated in the explosion of 1789, giving birth to a power that perfectly fits the description of the king who would do according to his will, shattering centuries of tradition. This new power would exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. This was fulfilled during the Revolution's most radical phase, the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 94. The National Convention of France launched an official campaign of de-Christianization. Churches were closed, religious icons were destroyed, and the Bible was publicly burned. In a stunning act of defiance, the Assembly officially declared that God did not exist. As one historian noted, France stands apart in the world's history as the single state which, by the decree of her legislative assembly, pronounced that there was no God. The prophecy continues. This king would not regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. At the same time, it abolished God. The revolutionary government degraded the institution of marriage, reducing it to a mere temporary civil contract that could be dissolved at will. One contemporary actress described this new republican marriage as the sacrament of adultery.
Having rejected the God of their fathers, they were to honor a God whom his fathers knew not. In place of Christianity or pagan gods, the revolutionaries established the state-sponsored, atheistic cult of reason. The climax of this new worship came on November 10, 1793, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, now rededicated as the Temple of Reason. The Christian altar was replaced by an altar to liberty, and a young actress was enthroned and adored as the living goddess of reason. This was, in the most literal sense, a strange god. This new religion was also the god of forces, or, more literally, fortresses. The ceremonies of the cult of reason explicitly included the forming of new vows for the prosperity of the armies of the Republic. When the radical atheism of this cult proved too chaotic, Maximilien Robespierre replaced it with the deistic cult of the Supreme Being. While less overtly atheistic, it was still a religion created by the state, for the state's purposes, to instill civic virtue and loyalty to the Republic. Finally, this power shall divide the land for gain. Prior to 1789, the Catholic Church was the largest landowner in France. The revolutionary government confiscated these vast church properties along with the estates of the exiled nobility and sold them off in parcels. This massive redistribution of land was done to finance the new state and its wars, a literal dividing of the land for gain. The prophecy states this king would, quote, prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. This period of revolutionary upheaval reached its prophetic culmination in 1798. In that year, the French army, under General Louis-Alexandre Berthier, marched into Rome, arrested Pope Pius VI, and declared an end to the temporal political power of the papacy. This event, occurring exactly 1260 years after the decree of Justinian was enforced in 538 AD, marked the time appointed, the end of long period of papal supremacy, and its dramatic close. The journey from Imperial Rome to the fires of revolution has been a dramatic review of history, a pattern of power foretold. But this epic story is merely the foundation. The events that follow will bring this ancient prophecy out of the past and directly into the modern world. You may not be prepared for what comes next because it is the very history that connects to our time.